He drove until the tar ended and the telephone lines thinned to spider webs, until the hills outside Eldoret folded into maze and scrub, and a farmhouse that looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. Wambogo had come for a missing persons tip that smelled more like rumor than fact. 5 vanishings in 6 months, all near Mabanga Farm, all at the same hour, midnight. Locals had a name for what took people. They called it MBEGU, a seed that eats. He set up his camera on the dashboard, the setting sun staining the hills, and told his viewers the truth he had come to test. Some stories are not just stories, and the land remembers things you would rather not know. The house crouched behind a rusted gate, where a carved ox cart wheel bore a strange mark. 3 concentric rings, with a dot burned into the wood. Mrs. Jerry, small and stooped, met him at the gate, with eyes like old glass. She spoke in the slow, cut-or-not way of people who have learned to fold grief into their sentences. 5 names she gave him, each a pebble dropped into a well. A boda rider, a schoolgirl, a church elder, a young mother, and the last, the farmhand Karanja. Each disappearance had the same shape. They were taken where the ground was shallow, when the moon was hungry. She said the land answered with silence. She warned him not to go at night. He would go anyway. That night, lantern light in the farmhouse kitchen made the shadows tall. Auntie Mary poured tea and told the story they told to keep fear tidy. Long before the road, when grandfathers kept goats, there was a man who traded seed for gold. He stole from the soil. The earth ate his children until only a single seed remained, an ember of memory that needed blood and silence. They buried that seed under the first maize. Whether it was curse or ritual, she said, hardly mattered here. In this country, the two often braided into one another. She directed Wambogo to a priest, Father Kilonzo, and to Lucy, the teenager who had last seen her brother. Father Kilonzo kept a map regular as a prayer and as stained. He marked the disappearances with pins until the pins made a rough circle around a small kopje. He told Wambogo of offerings found at the hill, ashes, feathers, small bones, and handed him an old field cassette with a recording of a chant taken at the kopje. The sound was warped, the voices echoing as though the microphone had been forced under soil. Father Kilonzo believed the earth listened. He believed the kopje held something that had been given power by memory and wrong. They walked the path wearing red LEDs and the wind for company, the night full of ordinary sounds that turned conspiratorial. A dog bark, a faraway church bell, the soft rattle of maize. The trail to the kopje was lined with offerings, boiled eggs, clumps of hair, kernels, small tributes like coins left in a closed booth. At the base of the hill, they found a fresh hole where the earth had been disturbed. They set up a camera and waited. Midnight always sounded larger there, as if the night itself held its breath. At the stroke of the hour, a low hum rose from the ground, a frequency felt as much as heard, pressing against teeth and bones. Lucy clutched Wambogo's sleeve, and a child's laugh, thin and distorted, brushed the brush and then vanished. Something moved fast in the dark, not quite human, not quite shadow. They fled and returned at dawn to a spiral of freshly cut maize stalks, laid like a ritual. And in the center of that spiral sat a single blackened seed, small as a coal and heavier than common sense. Close to, the seed looked like it breathed. When Wambogo held it on his palm, it laughed at light, steaming once as the sun found it. Lucy said it had been under her brother's bunk and had turned up when he left. He put the seed in his camera bag, a coin of proof that this was no simple flavor of superstition. He took it to the market the next day, where Dr. Mwaniki, an old botanist who read both plants and rumors, handled it like a relic. It was not maize, and not any grain, the doctor knew. It smelled metallic and bitter, soaked in tannin, as if memory could be distilled into an odor. Dr. Mwaniki spoke of seeds that remember trauma, of where science and story sit in the same chair and argue. He showed Wambogo a ledger, colonial ink, landowner names, and pointed to Mbaruka, a name with old violence wrapped around it. Evictions, bargains sealed with rights, men who made the soil productive by other people's suffering. The kopje had seen it all. The land kept records that did not sit on library shelves. Tension tightened like a belt across the village after more vanishings. Lights stayed on all night. Karanja's dog was found at the gate, with eyes milky, and a ring of burnt earth lay like a wound around the kopje. Wambogo reviewed footage and froze on a frame. At 7 seconds past midnight, a pale figure moved behind the farmhouse, with motion too fluid for bone and muscle. It paused at a child's toy, and for a moment the toy's plastic face seemed to pull into it, as if recognition could be consumed. Someone on a radio hissed, "It knows when you're watching," as if the creatures of that place had learned the habits of curiosity and the shape of cameras. They decided, eventually, to confront the kopje with something heavier than flashlights: faith, science, names. In a storm that broke the sky open, they returned with Father Kalonzo, Dr. Mwaniki, Lucy, and a handful of villagers carrying crucifixes, carved hoes, and photographs of the disappeared. They circled the kopje with their lamps and their voices until the ground itself rose up in a low, continuous hum, and a thin fog curled around their ankles. Lucy began to mimic the children's whistle her brother made. Across the wet air, they heard it answered by a chorus of faint voices, an echo of human sounds folded into the soil. The group laid the photographs in a ring and drove an old hoe into the earth at the center. The soil split. Steam that smelled of burnt maize and iron rolled up, and from the fissure a shadow lifted. It was a shape that denied a simple name, neither animal nor fully human. It moved like smoke given flesh, its edges dissolving into the night and reforming into a face that seemed to be stitched from photographs. It drifted toward the ring of pictures, and when it touched them, the images slid off their paper like skin. Wambogo watched as the photograph of Lucy's brother, smiling, flushed in a school uniform, unclipped, and was drawn into the shadow. For a heartbeat, a child's whistle replied with a real, human sob. Then, silence. A sound like a seed cracking split the air. Dr. Mwaniki, who had taught Wambogo that seeds can be witnesses, suggested they return what the kopje demanded. It wanted names, admissions, the small lies, and large betrayals that had been laid like fertilizer over the years. One by one, the villagers spoke. Petty thefts, old betrayals, the way their fathers had sold land for short-term coin, the way colonial men had taken entire harvests and left dry words. Each confession seemed to slow the shadow. Each name, read from the circle of photographs, pulsed like a small light beneath the skin of the thing rising. Wambogo's voice cracked last. He said aloud the worst minor sin that had ever gnawed at him, how he had once sacrificed a man's life to a story that would make his channel grow. He said the man's name and asked for forgiveness. He slipped the black seed into the fissure, and for an instant, nothing happened. Then the fissure drew the seed as if it had been waiting for that particular debt. The shadow convulsed, and the photographs folded back into paper, but not without leaving a trace. A child's sob came again, closer this time, hoarse and human. The ground knit itself shut. When the first bird dared to call, the missing were found at the kopje's edge, lost, disoriented, and returned as if having been asleep for a long journey. They clutched at sunlight and at legs, blinking as if waking from a dream that would not entirely go away. People wept, and for a while it seemed the land would rest. They carried some answers back to the farmhouse. The maize nearest the kopje was blackened and would not grow for a season. The village rebuilt lights and schedules and a new kind of night watch. Wambogo uploaded his footage and watched the comments churn between gratitude and disbelief and the many colors of explanation. He believed that telling the story changed nothing about what the land had taken and everything about what the living must do when memory rises up. A few days later, he sat in his room, scrolling past supplications and theories and the usual hunger of the internet. He kept a tin for small things, notes, a coin, and the black seed he had thought he had buried in the kopje. When he opened it, there was another seed inside, glossy, untouched, warm as if someone had breathed on it recently. Beyond the window, the wind made an old whistle the way a child might whistle on their way home. Wambogo set the seed on the sill and watched it pulse once, like a small breath. He felt then what the kopje had wanted all along: acknowledgement. An admission can feed a wound or starve it. Sometimes it is impossible to tell which until the land decides to speak again. Outside, the night bent around the hills, and the lights in Mabanga Farm winked like tired eyes. Some debts the earth keeps, and some stories, once told into the right kind of silence, do not leave the teller unlocked. The seed sat there on the sill, dark and patient, and the camera cut to black as the wind carried, faintly, a child's whistle into the dark.